SpaceX launched its fifth Starship test flight, marking a historic moment in space exploration.
How do you do that? Is it just sheer will?
I don't know. I think I've learned a lot of lessons about how to make things go fast, and just taking the general approach of if a design is taking too long, the design is wrong.
Yeah.
It finally happened. In 2024, Elon Musk revealed the groundbreaking artificial gravity Starship, a revolutionary leap towards space exploration.
We're doing a lot of good things at SpaceX. I mean, Starlink is incredible, providing connectivity throughout the world, and also, paying for a lot of what we're doing here.
After years of anticipation and failed attempts to reach orbit, SpaceX has made it possible to generate gravity in space. Imagine astronauts journeying to Mars, no longer floating aimlessly but walking inside a rotating Starship. Could this be the key to overcoming the challenges of long-term space travel? Let's find out. The spark of an idea. It was November 2005. SpaceX, the company everyone knows today for launching rockets into space, hadn't even sent its first rocket up yet. Elon Musk, the man with big ideas, had something bigger on his mind. He envisioned a rocket so powerful, so enormous that it could carry more than 200,000 pounds all the way to low Earth orbit. Imagine trying to send something that heavy soaring through the sky. It wasn't just any rocket though, it was something that would change everything, and he called it the BFR, which stood for Big Falcon Rocket. Fast forward to 2012 and Musk made a huge announcement. SpaceX was now setting its sights on something beyond its already famous Falcon 9 rocket. The BFR wasn't just a dream anymore, but the key to making humans interplanetary. This rocket was going to Mars, the mission to transport people and bring them back. You can almost picture the excitement building as this idea took flight. SpaceX called it the Mars Colonial Transporter, and yes, it was as massive and ambitious as it sounds. But the plot thickened in 2016 when Elon decided the rocket wouldn't just take people to Mars, it would take them even further. What could possibly be beyond Mars, you ask? Well, the whole universe, of course.
Where success is one of the possible outcomes. No rocket before this has had the potential to extend life to another planet.
The name was changed to the Interplanetary Transport System. Imagine a spaceship so powerful it could travel not just to Mars, but to other planets beyond. How thrilling would that be? But here's where it gets even more exciting. By 2017, the rocket, now temporarily renamed the BFR, had evolved into something much more complex. The plan was to make it reusable and a rocket that could fly, land, and then fly again. With this, SpaceX wasn't just dreaming about reaching space, they were aiming to create a whole new way of exploring the cosmos. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but just like any good story, there was an unexpected twist. In 2018, SpaceX made a crucial decision. They were no longer going to build the rocket using carbon fiber, which had been the original material of choice. Instead, they switched to stainless steel. You might be wondering, why stainless steel? Elon Musk explained that it was stronger, cheaper, and more resistant to extreme cold and heat, perfect for the challenges of space travel. With this change, SpaceX's vision of the rocket became even clearer. By 2019, the entire spacecraft was now called Starship, with its booster named Super Heavy. This wasn't just about launching rockets anymore, this was about creating a spaceship capable of venturing into the unknown, reusable heat shields and all. The flight tests begin. Now that the rocket's design had been finalized, the next step was testing it in real life. This is where things really get interesting. The first prototype, known as Starhopper, was built in 2018. It was time to see if the grand ideas could actually fly. In 2019, Starhopper took off for the first time. It wasn't a high-altitude flight, but it was a start. It performed a couple of successful, low-altitude flights, and the dream started to feel real. SpaceX began working on larger prototypes like the Starship Mark 1 and Mark 2 at their facilities in Texas and Florida. The excitement was building, but soon disaster struck. Mecha 1 was destroyed during a pressure stress test, and Mecha 2 never even made it to flight. It was deconstructed in 2020, leaving everyone wondering if the next version succeeded. Enter the SN series, short for serial number. These prototypes were the next step in the journey, but as history shows, things don't always go as planned. SN1 and SN3 both collapsed during pressure tests. SN4, it exploded after its 5th engine test. It seemed like SpaceX was hitting one roadblock after another, but they didn't give up. In June 2020, SpaceX took a big step forward by starting to build a launch pad specifically for Starship's orbital flights. They knew this was just the beginning, and they were ready to push ahead. Then came SN5. This one looked different. It didn't have the typical rocket fins or a nose cone. In fact, it was more of a cylindrical shape, powered by just one Raptor engine. But on August 5th, 2020, the moment of truth arrived. SN5 flew 150 meters into the air, hovering like a gigantic metallic bird, and then safely landed on the nearby pad. A month later, its twin SN6 repeated the same flight. It seemed like SpaceX was finally getting it right. Now, things were getting serious. Starship SN8 was the first full-size prototype. It had no heat shield yet, but that didn't stop SpaceX from pushing it to its limits. In December 2020, SN8 flew high, 12.5 kilometers into the sky. As it soared, it slowly shut off its engines one by one. It was like watching a movie, the tension rising with every second. But then just as it tried to land, disaster struck. A problem with the methane header tank caused the engines to fail, and SN8 crashed into the landing pad with a fiery explosion. The crowd held their breath. It was a setback, but the mission had proven that Starship could fly. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. SpaceX hadn't gotten the proper clearance from the Federal Aviation Administration for that test. They had violated their launch license, and for the next 2 months, the FAA investigated what went wrong. It turns out SpaceX had ignored warnings from the FAA, going ahead with the launch despite the risks. This caused quite a stir, with critics pointing out how dangerous this move had been.
Now, SpaceX has pulled off its boldest test flight yet of its enormous Starship rocket, catching the returning booster back at the launch pad with mechanical arms.
Despite the FAA investigation, SpaceX didn't stop. In February 2021, they launched SN9 to a height of 10 kilometers. The flight seemed to be going well, but just like SN8, it crashed during landing. One of its engines had failed to ignite, another crash, another explosion, but also another learning experience. By March, SpaceX was ready to try again with SN10. This time, it seemed like they had it figured out. SN10 followed the same path as its predecessors, but managed to land successfully, or so it seemed. A few minutes after landing, SN10 exploded due to a damaged propellant tank. SpaceX was getting closer, but success was still out of reach. Then came SN11. The prototype flew into thick fog, and just as it was coming down, it too exploded midair, likely due to excess propellant in one of its engines. It seemed like SpaceX was hitting roadblocks at every turn, but they weren't done yet. Amid these explosive setbacks, SpaceX was already planning for the future. They revealed plans for even more launch pads, landing pads, and testing facilities. They were building the infrastructure to support not just a few flights, but a whole fleet of Starships. They even started building fuel storage tanks at their new orbital launch pad. The next prototype in line, SN15, had significant improvements over the previous models. It had better engines, a stronger structure, and more advanced avionics. On May 5th, 2021, SN15 took off, performing all the same maneuvers as the earlier prototypes. But this time, something was different. It landed safely. There was a small fire in the engine area after landing, but it was quickly put out. The beginning of something huge. It was the middle of 2021. The world was still recovering from various global challenges, but in the background, something enormous was taking shape. At SpaceX, Super Heavy BN3 had just completed its first full test. Imagine the roar of the engines lighting up as they fired for the very first time. 3 powerful engines came to life, giving everyone a small taste of what was to come. It was a moment of triumph, but it was only the beginning. Soon after, SpaceX changed how they named their rockets. Instead of calling their spacecraft SN, they began calling them Ship, and the boosters that would propel them into space were named Booster. It was a subtle change, but it signaled something much bigger. SpaceX was no longer just testing rockets. They were building spaceships capable of taking humanity beyond the stars. A month later, something even more impressive happened. Using a giant crane, SpaceX stacked Ship 20 on top of Booster 4. For the first time ever, the full launch vehicle stood tall, ready for future flights. Ship 20 was special because it had something no other rocket had before: a heat shield that covered its entire body, designed to protect it during its fiery return to Earth.
Starship is actually a gigantic launcher. It was designed as early as 2020 by SpaceX to send men, but also equipment, first to the moon as part of NASA's Artemis program, but also perhaps in a more distant future to Mars.
But building rockets isn't just about stacking metal parts. There were other challenges SpaceX needed to overcome. In October of the same year, SpaceX installed huge mechanical arms onto the tower that would eventually help catch these rockets when they return from space. They called them chopsticks because of their shape, and these arms would play a critical role in future missions. Things were moving fast, but there was still so much more to come. SpaceX had a lot of ambition, but that didn't mean the road to success would be smooth. By mid-2022, they faced a new hurdle. The Federal Aviation Administration had identified over 75 issues that needed to be addressed in their environmental assessment. You can almost feel the tension building as SpaceX faced this long list of challenges. Could they fix everything in time? Would these environmental concerns hold them back from launching their rockets? The clock was ticking. In July, Booster 7 underwent a test, one that ended with an explosion. Yes, you read that right. The test caused an explosion at the base of the rocket, destroying part of the pressure pipe and causing damage to the launch pad. It was a setback, and the dream of space travel seemed further away than ever. But SpaceX didn't give up. Testing and more testing. By the end of November, things started to pick up speed again. Ship 24 performed multiple engine test fires, showing that the team was still moving forward. Booster 7, despite the earlier explosion, also performed tests, this time with multiple engines firing. The engines roared to life one by one, and on February 9th, 2023, a massive test saw 31 engines firing at 50% power. You can imagine the excitement as the ground shook and the team watched their creation perform. It wasn't perfect, but they were getting closer to that first flight. In January 2023, the entire Starship system underwent something called a wet dress rehearsal. It's kind of like a practice run where they fill the rocket with fuel and go through all the steps needed for launch without actually taking off. Everything seemed to be in place for the big moment. April 2023 rolled around and it was time for the big show. On the 17th of April, SpaceX was ready to launch, but then, the very last moment, the launch was aborted. It was a nail-biting moment for everyone watching. Was this it? Was all their hard work about to crumble? But no, the team didn't give up. Just 3 days later, on the 20th of April, the engines fired up once again, and this time, there was no turning back. The rocket lifted off the ground with an incredible roar.
Starship is the first design of a rocket that is actually capable of making life multiplanetary.
As it climbed higher and higher into the sky, everyone held their breath. But the excitement didn't last long. Almost immediately, 3 engines failed and more problems followed. As the rocket reached its peak about 24 miles above the Earth, it began to lose control. The booster couldn't keep its engines pointed in the right direction, and the rocket started to spin out of control. What happened next was even more dramatic. 3 minutes into the flight, the rocket's self-destruct system was activated. The rocket tumbled through the air for another 40 seconds before disintegrating completely. Pieces of sand and soil were blasted into the air, traveling more than 10 kilometers away. It wasn't just the rocket that was damaged. A fire started on nearby Parkland, burning acres of land. After the explosion, SpaceX had some serious work to do. The launch mount, which had taken a beating during the first test, needed to be repaired. The The company reinforced the foundation of the tower and added a water-powered flame deflector to prevent similar issues in the future. But while the physical damage could be fixed, there were still many questions about what went wrong. In August, SpaceX submitted their report to the FAA outlining 63 corrective actions they needed to take before they could launch again. By September, the FAA had closed the investigation, allowing SpaceX to move forward with their plans. The second test flight. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. On November 18, 2023, Booster 9 and Ship 25 were ready for the second test flight. This time, everything seemed to be going smoothly. All 33 engines fired perfectly, propelling the rocket into the sky. The rocket performed a crucial maneuver called hot staging, where the second stage separated from the first while the engines were still burning. For a moment, it seemed like SpaceX had done it, but then disaster struck again. The Super Heavy booster flipped around to prepare for its return, but multiple engine failures caused it to explode before it could complete the landing. 3.5 minutes into the flight, a blockage in one of the filters caused the booster to be destroyed. The second stage continued on its journey, reaching an altitude of 93 miles, but just before it could enter orbit, telemetry was lost. The flight termination system activated once again, ending the mission in failure.
You see, rockets are launched using something called boosters. Now, usually a booster separates from the main rocket at some distance, it falls back to Earth, or it burns.
Despite the setbacks, SpaceX was determined to keep going. After the second test flight, they made major improvements to the rocket. One of the biggest changes was the upgrade to the thrust vector control system, which was now electric, making it more reliable. They also worked on delaying the release of liquid oxygen to prevent problems during engine cutoff. March 14, 2024 marked the third test flight, and this time, things were looking better. All 33 engines ignited perfectly, and stage separation went as planned. But during the booster's descent, something went wrong again. At just over 1,500 feet above the ocean, the booster exploded, dashing hopes of a successful landing. Despite the continued setbacks, there was hope. The Starship spacecraft reached space and conducted several important tests. It even performed a propellant transfer demo, a key technology needed for future missions. Although telemetry was lost during re-entry, the test was considered a success by NASA and SpaceX. The fourth flight. June 6, 2024 marked a turning point in the story. The fourth test flight was successful in many ways. The Super Heavy booster managed to perform a soft splashdown in the ocean, and the Starship itself survived the fiery re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, making a controlled splashdown. It was the first time SpaceX had achieved these goals, and it felt like they were finally getting closer to their dream. The cost of going to space. From July 2014 to May 2023, SpaceX spent more than $3 billion developing their Starbase facility and the Starship rocket systems. Imagine having that much money dedicated to one big idea, traveling beyond Earth. But wait, it gets even more exciting. Elon Musk announced in April 2023 that SpaceX planned to spend another $2 billion that year alone on Starship. Just think about that for a moment. That's the kind of money it takes to build something that could take people to the moon, Mars, and beyond. Now you might be wondering, why does it cost so much to launch a rocket into space? Well, the costs are enormous, but Musk has a vision for the future. He believes that once Starship is fully operational, each launch might only cost SpaceX around $1 million. However, some experts think the price will be higher. Pierre Lianet, the director of research at Eurospace, suggested in 2022 that launching Starship might cost more because of the huge development expenses SpaceX had to cover. Even though SpaceX hopes to lower the costs eventually, building a rocket this complex isn't cheap.
SpaceX's Super Heavy booster has successfully landed in Texas, marking a milestone in the company's quest for reusability.
One of the most exciting parts of SpaceX's story is its involvement in NASA's Artemis program, which aims to send humans back to the moon. In April 2021, NASA awarded SpaceX a fixed-price contract worth $2.89 billion to develop the human landing system that would bring astronauts to the lunar surface. This contract was for Artemis 3, a mission that plans to land humans on the moon once again. How amazing is that? SpaceX would be part of history, helping humankind return to the moon after decades. But every good story has its conflicts. SpaceX wasn't the only company vying for this contract. Blue Origin, another space company, also wanted to win the contract, and they weren't happy when SpaceX was chosen. So Blue Origin took NASA to court, causing a 3-month delay in the contract. The legal battle kept everyone on edge, but in the end, the court ruled in favor of SpaceX and the contract was back on track. 2 years later, Blue Origin finally won its own contract for a lunar lander worth $3.4 billion. So both companies are now in the race to help NASA achieve its lunar ambitions, and it's thrilling to see how it all plays out. In 2022, the United States Space Force also awarded SpaceX a $102 million contract to develop the rocket cargo program. This program aims to figure out how rockets can be used to transport large amounts of cargo across the world in record time. Imagine a world where rockets aren't just for going to space, but can also be used to deliver supplies or goods from one part of the planet to another in under an hour. That's the future SpaceX and the Space Force are exploring. Starship's launches and setbacks. Let's jump ahead to the thrilling part, the launches of Starship. So far, SpaceX has launched Starship 4 times between April 2023 and June 2024. These launches have seen both success and failure, making the journey even more suspenseful. The first 2 launches were considered failures as the rockets didn't make it all the way. However, the 3rd and 4th launches were successes, proving that SpaceX was making progress, but the story isn't over yet. SpaceX's Starship rockets are currently using a version called Block 1. These will soon be replaced by Block 2 ships after 2 more flights. Block 1 boosters are expected to fly even further into the future, and who knows what incredible heights they'll reach. Did you know that Starship is also crucial for SpaceX's Starlink project? Starlink is a system that provides high-speed internet to more than 70 countries using satellites launched into space. Starship is planned to be the rocket that launches the next generation of Starlink satellites, making the process cheaper and faster. SpaceX has been relying on profits from Starlink to fund its Starship development. Although Starlink wasn't making money until the end of 2022, it became cash flow positive in the first quarter of 2023. Still, Elon Musk mentioned that Starlink had only reached a break-even cash flow by 2023. It wasn't a huge profit, but it was a step in the right direction. SpaceX's partnership with NASA through the Artemis program is a big deal. Starship HLS was chosen as the lunar lander for the Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 missions. Here's how it works. Starship HLS will be launched into low Earth orbit, and then it will be refueled by other Starship tanker spacecraft. After refueling, it will head toward the moon, performing what's called a trans-lunar injection burn. Once Starship HLS reaches the moon, it will enter an orbit that swings around the lunar poles.
A NASA spacecraft blasted off today, headed towards Jupiter's moon Europa.
At this point, NASA's Orion spacecraft will dock with Starship, and 2 astronauts will transfer into Starship HLS to land on the lunar surface. After their mission on the moon is complete, they will return to Orion and make their way back to Earth. It's a mind-blowing concept, but SpaceX and NASA are working hard to make it happen. Starship isn't just for transporting humans to space, it also has the potential to revolutionize space science. Astronomers have suggested that Starship's huge size and ability to carry large objects could help build bigger space telescopes. These telescopes could be launched in one piece without needing complicated setups like the James Webb Space Telescope. With Starship's low launch cost, it could even allow for the use of more affordable materials in space missions, opening the door to even more scientific discoveries. NASA is already looking into how Starship could help with future space observatories, like the Habitable Worlds Observatory, which will search for signs of life on distant planets. Some experts, like former NASA JPL architect Casey Hanmer, believe that Starship could lead to building telescopes big enough to see planets up close, possibly detecting signs of life or even seasonal changes. The latest developments, and anti-gravity. They're about to make their 3rd attempt to launch their gigantic Starship into orbit, and if all goes well, it might just happen on March 14th. there's a lot that has to go right first, including getting regulatory approval, which is basically a fancy way of saying they need the green light from the people in charge. So for now, everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see if SpaceX will finally make history. But while all of this is happening, Elon Musk, the mastermind behind SpaceX, is already dreaming about the next big thing, traveling all the way to Mars on Starship. Just imagine that. In fact, he's thinking about how to make the journey more comfortable for astronauts. Musk mentioned that on the way to Mars, Starship will have a small spin. Now, what does that mean? Well, spinning the spacecraft could create a little bit of gravity, which is better than having no gravity at all. Musk's idea came after John Carmack, the founder of a video game company, suggested that SpaceX try spinning their Dragon shuttle, which already carries astronauts, to test how spin gravity would work. Now let's talk about this idea of spinning for gravity. It's not a new concept. The idea of using the force of a rotating spaceship to create gravity has been around for more than 100 years. It's even a big part of science fiction. If you've ever watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, you might remember the famous scene where people jog around a rotating spaceship. That's the idea in action. But why go through all this trouble of spinning a spacecraft? Well, scientists have found that being in space for too long without gravity can be really bad for human health. Astronauts can lose bone density, and their vision can change because of something called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. Pretty scary, right? But spinning a spaceship comes with its own set of problems. For one, the spacecraft has to be pretty big to spin slowly enough to make a comfortable amount of gravity.
He fired off a massive rocket over the weekend and then performed an extraordinary feat never done before, the booster rocket.
If the spacecraft is too small, it would have to spin really fast, and that could make the astronauts feel dizzy or even motion sick. Wired magazine pointed out that the gravity effects could be different for an astronaut's feet and head, which could lead to other weird problems. Astrophysicist Peter Haig, replying to Musk's idea on Twitter, suggested something else. Instead of spinning just one Starship, why not send two and tether them together? This way you could get a longer distance between the two ships and simulate the kind of gravity you'd find on Mars. Interesting idea, right? Although Musk didn't respond to this directly, he had mentioned in 2021 that SpaceX was already considering such a possibility. It seems like the idea of spinning spaceships to create artificial gravity is something many people are thinking about. However, there's another challenge when it comes to spinning Starship, keeping it cool and capturing energy from the sun. Space YouTuber Marcus House pointed out that spinning the Starship might make it harder to keep the temperature low enough for cryogenic fuel and to keep the solar panels pointing in the right direction. The journey to Mars is full of hurdles, but with every new idea, SpaceX and other companies get closer to turning science fiction into science fact.